everyone! So today I'm filming an about me / frequently asked question video where I will be talking a little bit about myself. I realized a while back that I've had this channel for over 2 years, and if you don't follow me on any other social media platforms, you might not know that much about me aside from my name and the fact that I like to make things. And though that's perfectly fine, I thought some of you might be interested in learning more, which is why I'm making this video today. So I'll get started with the easy stuff. My name is Angela and I live in the United States, or more specifically, I live on Long Island, which is in New York. I'm 19 years old and I live with my parents and my dog. I had kind of a unique childhood. I was homeschooled from 2nd grade up until I was 16, which is when I got my GED. I was always a very creative, crafty child. I loved to paint and sketch and draw, and I was really into knitting, and whenever I could get my hands on scrapbooking supplies or rubber stamps, I was all over that. I just loved anything that had to do with the creative process, and I found it so much fun. When I was a little bit older, I got really into video games, which somehow led me to anime, and after getting to anime, I became really interested in cosplay, which is when you dress up as fictional characters and usually go to conventions. I cosplayed for about a year, just scraping up whatever money I had together to buy costumes, but I got to a point where the characters I wanted to dress up as were too obscure, so I couldn't find costumes available for them. My mom was the one who really pushed me to start making my own cosplay costumes. We were watching Project Runway together, and she was very insistent that I could do what they did, just because I'm such a visual person. And she thought if I had a dress form, I'd be able to drape my own costumes and make my own patterns. And she said she would buy me a dress form if I made a real attempt at making costumes. She held up her end of the bargain and I held up mine, and that's how I got into sewing. I cosplayed for a couple years and really enjoyed it, but towards the end I wasn't watching anime anymore and I was picking characters based off of their costumes more than the fact that I liked their personality, and that made me realize that I might be happier creating original designs or historical projects. So that's what I did, and it's been about 2 years since I started doing that, and I've been making historical costumes ever since and absolutely loving it. So that's a bit about me and what I've spent my last couple years doing, and now I'll get right into the frequently asked questions. So the first question is, when did I start sewing? And I actually learned to sew when I was quite young. I took a sewing class when I was about 7, and we made pincushions and potpourri bags. So that's technically when I started sewing, but I wasn't really interested in sewing and pursuing it as a hobby until the beginning of 2012, and I didn't finish my first cosplay until April 2012. So that's what I usually tell people, even though I did learn the basics when I was quite young. Question number 2 is, how did I learn how to sew? And as I said, I learned the basics when I was quite young, and those really stuck with me. But when it comes to draping and making clothing and hats and anything like that, I'm completely self-taught. And I learned just through trial and error. I would basically try 3 different methods, and if none of them worked, then I would look online for help and I'd see what other people did. And if I couldn't get their methods to work for me, then I'd just make something up. And I was very determined. I didn't really let my lack of knowledge stop me from making relatively complicated things. And even though a lot of those things were made quite poorly, I learned a lot while making them. And I was so determined to finish them that not doing it was never really an option. So yeah, it was just trial and error and a willingness to look stuff up online and a determination to get things done and making stuff up while I went along. There wasn't any specific website or resource that I used. It was just completely playing around with fabric and looking online to see what other people had done. Question number 3 is, do you have any advice for beginners? And since I learned in such an untraditional way, this is a hard question for me to answer. And I also think it's a hard question to answer because everyone learns so differently. There isn't a single book or website out there that's going to be helpful for everyone. So the advice I can give relates more to the state of mind I think beginners should be in than a book or website that will be especially helpful. And that advice is to be willing to practice, to be excited and determined to learn, and to be really open to finding answers to your own questions. I really think anyone who follows that advice can learn how to sew and can become really good at it. It's just a matter of being willing to take advantage of all the information that's already out there. There's so many resources, whether it's books or blogs or forums or YouTube videos, and if you're willing to take advantage of them and to practice, and you have access to a sewing machine, then there's really nothing stopping you. Question number 4 is, do I plan on going to design school? The short answer to this question is no, And the longer answer has to do with me being more interested in costume programs than fashion. And a lot of the schools out there that had curriculums I was really interested in were fashion schools. And those schools leave you with job opportunities in the fashion industry, which I have little to no interest in. I'm far more interested in making costumes for film, or theater, or stage, which is actually a completely different field, even though they require similar skill sets. A lot of the schools that did offer a degree I was interested in were performing arts schools, which for one thing are usually private, so they're very expensive. And they also don't really have any classes to do with costume design. You just take the leftover classes like lighting design and design for stage and history of theater and stuff like that, which I didn't really feel was worth the tuition money. And I was kind of worried that I wouldn't be able to stay motivated when my coursework really had very little to do with the thing that I loved doing. And the programs I was most excited about were unfortunately all master's programs, which require you to have an associate's arts degree. And once again, I just couldn't see myself staying motivated for several years when my coursework had nothing to do with what I actually wanted to pursue. And on top of all of that, I'm a relatively anxiety-prone person, and I didn't think I would do very well in the dorm environment with a roommate where I didn't have a lot of control over the space that I got to relax in. And I also spoke to a number of people who had attended fashion schools or art schools and heard their opinions on it, and I just ultimately decided that it wasn't for me. So instead, I'm staying home and I'm trying to build my skills and portfolio by myself, and hopefully that will be strong enough to get me an internship even without the college experience. And from what I've heard, that hands-on experience matters more than a degree when you're looking for jobs. So fingers crossed that it will all work out. I know it isn't the traditional way of doing things, and it isn't a decision that I've taken lightly. I've put a lot of thought into it. So even if it isn't the decision that you would have made, I hope you'll be able to respect it. Question number 5 is what sort of job do I want / what sort of career goals do I have? As I said earlier, I want a job that has to do with making costumes. I personally find that a lot more interesting than the fashion side of things. Just making something that brings a character to life is so exciting to me, and that's what I want to spend my whole life doing, which means I'd like to work for a costume shop or film or theater / stage. So plays and operas and ballets, anything like that I would just absolutely adore. And since I've never worked in the industry, I can't tell you the exact jobs that I would want, but I do tend to favor creating costumes over designing them, so I think I would prefer something in the area of construction, but that may change once I have some hands-on experience. Question number 6 is why do I make so many costumes? And this is a 2-part answer. The first part is simply because I love doing it. I think it's so much fun and I enjoy it so much. I want to spend all my time and my entire life doing it, and it just makes me really happy. And the second part of that answer is because I'm trying to build my portfolio and skill set so I can get a job, and making lots of costumes will help with that. Question 7 is the one I hear most often, and it's how do you afford to make so many costumes? So before answering this, I just want to say that I don't think my costumes cost as much to create as people expect. I live in the United States where fabric is relatively inexpensive, and I'm also lucky enough to live near the garment district where you can buy a huge variety of fabrics for wholesale pricing in small quantities. And on top of that, I'm also someone who's willing to sacrifice quality for quantity. I make a lot of my costumes out of polyester alternatives to wool and silk, just to keep the cost down low. I recently completed an 18th century dress out of $2 a yard cotton. One of my favorite costumes I've ever created was made out of a faux wool flannel, which was $3 or $4 a yard. And I recently completed a huge elaborate ball gown, and the base material for that was a $4 a yard cotton sateen. So that's something I wish people would keep in mind when they see my costumes, that they don't necessarily cost as much to make as you would expect just based on how they look. As for how I afford it, I'm lucky enough to have parents who are very supportive and buy the majority of my fabric for me. They view what I'm doing now as kind of an alternative to college and something that's beneficial for my future. So they're willing to put money towards it, which I'm incredibly grateful for, but I do try and keep the cost down relatively low since I don't want to take advantage of that. And all of my most expensive fabrics and elaborate costumes have been at least partially self-funded, because I would feel horrible making them spend $25 for a yard of lace or something horribly unnecessary like that. Question number 8 is what do I do with old costumes? And to be completely honest, I've thrown a lot of them out. Many of them just weren't in condition where I would feel comfortable re-wearing them or selling them, and I felt like they really belonged in the trash. And I have no issues doing that because I don't get very attached to my costumes. I make them because I love sewing and because I love learning as I sew, So usually by the time I've finished a project, it's already served its purpose and I don't feel the need to really hold on to it, especially if it's taking up space that is preventing me from making more things. As for the ones I've held onto, unfortunately they don't serve much function aside from sitting around and looking pretty. I'm not involved in any clubs or reenactment events or anything like that, and as far as I'm aware of, there aren't any around where I live, so unfortunately they don't get much use aside from being dragged out for a photo shoot. I really do make them because I enjoy the process more than I enjoy wearing them. And question 9 is, how do I store them? If you've seen my sewing room tour, then you will know the answer to this question. I keep quite a few of them hanging up around my sewing room as well as in a very small closet. The costumes themselves are quite small once you remove the petticoats, which are stored separately from the dresses and often reused between projects. So that's how I managed to keep so many and store so many in a relatively small space. And question number 10 is, do you sell costumes or take commissions? I've never sold a costume, but I would consider doing it in the future. As I said, I don't get very attached to my costumes, and a lot of them are in good enough condition to sell, so that's definitely something I would consider doing in the future. When it comes to commissions, they kind of terrify me a little bit. Just the thought of working one-on-one with someone and trying to make something to their standards seems so stressful, though I would definitely consider taking ones on if someone sent me an idea I was really excited about. It isn't something I've pursued yet since it does scare me a little bit. And that was actually the last question, so that's all I have to say for now, but I will have a Q&A video where I'm answering questions that were asked on Instagram up later on in the week. So if you're interested in that, then definitely keep an eye out. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and enjoyed hearing me answer these questions and learning a bit more about me. And I hope you'll stick around for the next one. Thanks again for watching.